By early 1863, the United States was tearing itself apart. The Union Army possessed nearly every statistical advantage over the Confederacy: more factories, more railroads, and more men. Yet they were actively losing the war. The problem was a massive leadership vacuum at the very top. President Abraham Lincoln cycled through commanders, searching for a general who could push south and take the Confederate capital of Richmond. He appointed General Ambrose Burnside, which led to a catastrophic defeat at Fredericksburg. Union troops sat waiting for pontoon bridges to arrive, only to be slaughtered in wave after wave of frontal assaults against entrenched Confederate lines. The subsequent winter camps were completely miserable. Disease tore through the ranks, food supplies dwindled, and demoralized men began deserting the army in droves. To fill the manpower gaps, the Union introduced conscription, sparking violent draft riots in places like New York City. However, the military also finally began allowing black men to enlist. Knowing exactly what was at stake, these newly formed regiments fought with an incredible valor that completely silenced their critics and provided vital reinforcements. The North undeniably had the long-term resources and manpower to win a war of attrition. They simply needed a commander who could stop the immediate bleeding and utilize those vast industrial advantages. In the South, the situation was the exact inverse. The Confederacy was securing victories on the battlefield, but internally they were running out of time. Their economy was crumbling, civilian desperation reached a boiling point, the price of bread skyrocketed, vital supplies vanished, and violent riots broke out directly in the streets of Richmond. Confederate General Robert E. Lee understood the math of the conflict. The longer the war lasted, the worse their chances of survival became. He needed to force the North to surrender before his own resources evaporated. Lee executed a massive gamble to achieve this. He marched his army out of Virginia, up through Maryland, and directly into Pennsylvania, aiming to threaten Washington, D.C. on northern soil. In response, Lincoln appointed General George Meade to command the Army of the Potomac. Meade immediately pushed north to intercept. The town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, was not a planned strategic objective. It was simply the geographic point where Lee's offensive collided with the Union's primary army of defense. On the first day of July, forward units from both armies unexpectedly ran into each other. Skirmishes escalated into a full-blown battle right through the town itself. Terrified civilians hid in their cellars, though one resident reportedly ran into the crossfire to defend his crop of beans, unaware of the scale of the military forces in his yard. By the second day, the conflict exploded. Over 100,000 men converged on the area, battle lines stretching for miles across the Pennsylvania terrain. Lee's strategy for day 2 was to hit the Union's left and right flanks. He hoped to exploit these edges and collapse the entire defensive formation. The Confederate assault nearly broke through on the Union's left side. In a moment of desperation, Union Colonel Joshua Chamberlain ordered a bayonet charge. His forces smashed into the Confederate lines, forcing them back and allowing the Union to hold their position. The Union survived Lee's initial strikes on the flanks, but their successful defense would lead Lee to a fateful conclusion about their vulnerabilities on day 3. On the third day, Lee evaluated the entrenched Union positions. He reasoned that because Meade had reinforced his outer flanks to survive the previous day's attacks, the center of the Union line must be weak. Lee decided to launch one overwhelming central assault to end the war. Known as Pickett's Charge, thousands of Confederate soldiers marched across open ground, straight toward the heart of the Union line. General Meade had anticipated this exact move. He had kept his center strong, preparing a devastating counterassault for the moment the Confederates arrived. As the Confederates reached the Union lines, the defense unleashed a barrage that decimated the charging ranks. The survivors were violently forced to flee back across the field. The knockout blow had been deflected. Lee's gamble to end the war on his terms had failed. A devastated General Lee took responsibility for the failure and ordered his broken army to retreat back to Virginia. Simultaneously, news arrived from the West. General Ulysses S. Grant had captured Vicksburg, securing the Mississippi River and physically splitting the Confederacy in two. Back in Gettysburg, the aftermath was horrifying. The scale of the carnage forced the town to be converted into a massive, makeshift hospital to care for the thousands of wounded and dying men. Managing this crisis fell to volunteers like Clara Barton. These nurses performed the grueling work of caring for those who had sacrificed their lives on the field. While the Union had achieved a monumental strategic victory, the staggering loss of life demanded a new articulation of why the war had to continue. A new national cemetery had to be established at Gettysburg just to accommodate the overwhelming number of casualties from the three-day battle. Months later, President Lincoln attended the cemetery's dedication. After the main speaker delivered a 2-hour oration, Lincoln was called forward to give brief remarks. In a speech that lasted just 2 minutes, Lincoln defined the nation's purpose and the moral necessity of the continuing fight. The 3 days at Gettysburg did more than protect the North from Lee's gamble. By breaking the Confederate momentum and redefining the Union's goals, the battle turned the tide of the war and cemented the future of the United States.